Hi there! I bet you would like to hear a story. Well, today I have a tale about a cat who helped a boy become a prince. It begins, there was once a miller who had 3 sons, and when he died, his estate was divided among them without the help of an attorney, for his fee would have brought the little fortune to nothing. The eldest had the mill, the second got the donkey, and the youngest had nothing but the cat. He complained that poor indeed was his lot, saying, "My brothers may get their living easily enough by joining their inheritance together, but for me, when I have eaten the cat and made myself a fur cap out of his skin, I may soon die of hunger and want." The cat, who had heard all of this, as he sat listening just inside the door of the cupboard, came out and said gravely, "Do not worry yourself, my good master. You have only to give me a bag and have a pair of boots made for me so that I can scamper through the dirt and the brambles, and you shall see that your portion is not as bad as you now imagine it to be." The cat's master had often seen him play many a cunning trick, such as hanging by the heels to catch rats and mice, and hiding himself in the meal to make believe he was dead. So while he did not believe very much that the cat could help him, he did not want to rule out that he might be able to help him. He therefore obtained both bag and boots and watched the cat pull on the boots and put the bag around his neck, holding the strings with his forepaw, bidding his master be of good courage. Puss in Boots set forth. He went straight into a warren in which there were a great number of rabbits. He put some bran and some parsley into his bag, and then, having stretched out at full length as if dead, waited for some innocent young rabbits to feast on the dainties. Scarcely had he laid down until a foolish young rabbit jumped into his bag, and Puss in Boots quickly drew the strings. Puss in Boots was very proud of his prey, and hurried with it to the palace, and asked to speak to the king. Shown into the apartment of his majesty, Puss made a low bow, and said, "I have brought to you, sir, a rabbit from the warren of my noble lord, the Marquis of Carabas," the title Puss in Boots gave to his master, "which he commanded me to present to your majesty from him." The king was very much pleased, and said, "Tell thy lord Marquis of Carabas I accept his present with pleasure, and send my grateful thanks." Soon afterward, Puss in Boots hid himself among some standing corn. He held his bag open, and 2 fine partridges ran into it. Again he drew the strings tightly closed. He went to the palace, and the king received the partridges as he had the rabbit, and ordered his servants to give Puss something to drink. In this manner, the cat continued to carry presents of game to the king from the Marquis of Carabas. At least once a week, for 2 or 3 months he did this. One day, Puss, having learned the king intended to ride by the river with his daughter, the loveliest princess in all the world, said to his master, "If you will only follow my advice, your fortune is made." go to the river and bathe, just where I show you, and leave the rest to me." The Marquis of Carabas did exactly as the cat advised, though unable to guess what the cat intended. While he was bathing, the king passed by, and Puss in Boots began to cry out, "Help! Help! My Lord Marquis of Carabas is going to be drowned." Hearing the cries, the king put his head out of the window of the coach, and finding it was the cat, who had so often brought him such good game, he ordered his servants to go quickly to the rescue of my Lord Marquis of Carabas. While the servants were drawing the Marquis out of the river, Puss in Boots came up to the king's coach and told his majesty that as his master was bathing, some thieves went off with his clothes as they lay by the riverside, though the truth was that the cunning Puss himself had hidden them under a large stone. At this news, the king ordered the officers of his wardrobe to run and fetch one of his best suits and presented it to the Marquis. After the Marquis was dressed and seated in the king's own coach, the king was much impressed with him, for indeed he was a handsome gentleman, and it was not odd that the king's daughter fell deeply in love with him. Puss in Boots was quite overjoyed to see his plans succeeding so well, and marched on as before. Meeting some workers in the field, the cat said to them, "Good people, the king will soon pass this way. If you do not tell the king that the field you are working in belongs to my lord Marquis of Carabas, I will have you arrested." When the king came riding by, he asked the workers to whom the field they were working in belonged. "To my lord Marquis of Carabas," they answered together, for the threats of Puss in Boots had terrified them. "A very fine piece of land you have there, my lord Marquis," said the king, turning to him. "You speak the truth, sir," he replied, "for it never fails to bring me a bountiful harvest." Puss in Boots, going on as before, now came to a field where laborers toiled, putting the corn they had cut into great sheaves. To them he said, "Good people, the king will soon pass this way, and if you do not tell him that the corn you have picked in this field belongs to my lord Marquis of Carabas, I will have you arrested." When the king came riding by and asked to whom the field belonged, they answered happily, "To my lord Marquis of Carabas." The king once more complimented the Marquis upon his rich possessions. Still Puss in Boots continued on as before, giving the same orders to all the people he met, so that the king was astonished at the vast estates of my lord Marquis of Carabas. At last Puss in Boots arrived at a stately castle. It belonged to an ogre, the richest ever known, for all the land through which the king had passed that morning had belonged to him. Puss had taken care to learn all about the ogre and what he could do, and then asked to see him. When he entered the room, he bowed low and said that he could not pass so near his castle without doing himself the honor to inquire about the ogre's health. The ogre received him as civilly as an ogre could do and asked him to sit down. "I have been told," began Puss in Boots, "that you have the power to change yourself into all sorts of animals." "You can, for example, change yourself into a lion or an elephant? That is very true, replied the ogre, a little sternly. And to convince you, I will now become a lion. Puss in Boots was so terrified at finding himself so near to a lion that he sprang far from him and climbed to the roof of the palace, though it was with great difficulty, for his boots did not make walking on the tiles easy. A little while after, when Puss in Boots saw that the ogre had become an ogre once more, he ventured down from the roof, confessing that he had been greatly frightened. Moreover, he added, I have been informed, though it is almost impossible to believe it, that you have the power of taking the form of the smallest of animals. For example, you can change yourself into a rat or a mouse. Impossible to believe, is it? Stormed the ogre. You shall see. And in an instant, he became a mouse and began to scamper around the floor. No sooner had Puss cast his eyes upon the ogre in the form of a mouse than he sprang upon him, eating him in an instant. In the meantime, the king's coach approached the ogre's castle, and seeing it was very grand, the king desired to visit it, and so ordered his servants to drive up to the gates. Hearing the noise of the wheels on the drawbridge, Puss in Boots hastened out, saying, Your Majesty is indeed welcome to the castle of my Lord Marquis of Carabas. And is this splendid castle yours also, my Lord Marquis of Carabas? Inquired the king. Turning to the Marquis, Let's go in, if you please. The Marquis gave his hand to the princess as she got down, and they followed the king, who went before. They entered the spacious hall, where they found a splendid feast prepared by the ogre for some of his friends whom he had invited to visit him that very day, but who, hearing that the king, with the princess and a great gentleman of the court were within, had not dared enter. The king was so charmed with the good qualities of my Lord Marquis of Carabas, and his vast fortune as well, that after he had eaten, he said to the Marquis, It would be my pleasure for you to become my son-in-law, my dear Lord Marquis of Carabas. So great haste was made, and after a short courtship, the princess became the bride of the Marquis, and they lived happily ever after. Puss in Boots was made major domo, and wore the most beautiful clothes, and twisted his whiskers like a real live lord, and became so great a person, he would not even look at a rat. Just why he knew how to do all this for his master, I do not know, but I think it must have been because he wore boots. Don't you? The end. Thanks for letting me read to you today. I hope you enjoyed the story of Puss in Boots. If you had a good time, please feel free to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for even more stories. I can't wait to read to you again.